I'm Stila Webb.
And I'm Shuvom and Stila.
I'm going to write my first fiction novel this year.
And I'm going to film it.
And we're going to release one video each week.
And if you keep up with Stila's word count, by the end of 2017, you'll have...
I have to take my mind words and make them mouth words.
Alright, campers, now it's getting good. We're going to have episodes coming up on whether you should split your series into one book or many books.
Comedy.
Thanks. Because you're contributing there. And we're going to have a very special episode, now that you guys are past your midpoint, about planning your bad guys close-in section and planning your climax.
The hardest part of any book, really.
Yeah. The part you guys are in now is the hardest part of your book. They call it the boggy middle. It's when you gotta beat up your hero and you don't want to.
Everything has to keep getting worse, and you have to try to think of new ways for it to get worse.
Yeah. If you found that you don't want to write, you feel like everything you're writing is junk, don't worry, every writer hits it at this point in the book, after their midpoint.
That's usually about now.
That's why we got our best episodes coming up. But for today, we're talking about...
description.
Because 2 paragraphs of bad description can just yank your reader right out of the book.
Bad description gives your reader something to skip, and you don't want your readers skipping what you have spent all this time and effort and blood and sweat trying to write in the first place.
So it's hard to know what to describe and what not to describe.
And a new author's tendency is to over-describe. Early in a writer's life, we tend to want to write very detailed descriptions. We want to put in every little possible detail we possibly can about everything we write, and that's something we need to break.
So we're going to give you 2 rules on how we do...
Staying in.
Nope! So we're going to give you 2 rules on how we do good description. And the first one is, always describe to invoke some sort of emotion.
Or mood. I like mood.
Stretch it out while I'm writing?
No.
Stretch it out while I'm writing.
Mood.
Stretch. Good. For an example, we're going to give you a description of... So we actually looked up the WikiHow article on how to do good description in fiction novels, and it actually had the worst advice ever. So we're going to share it with you.
Really bad example.
So this is the description of a character description in the WikiHow article, which we won't link in the comments because they don't deserve it.
I don't want you copying these people.
Yeah. Here's how it starts out. It's 139 words.
Agatha had a narrow, oblong face with angular cheekbones and a pointed chin. Her slit-like eyes were a clouded hazel, and her thinly plucked eyebrows were shaped into a deceptively perfect arch that followed the slight curve of her eye. A long nose hooked over continually pursed lips, which were painted a bright red in an unsuccessful effort to mask their natural thinness. Bleached blonde hair, made thin from too many years of hair dye, hung straight down into an angular cut of her jaw. The sharp features of Agatha's face were merely a reflection of her entire body structure, and everything from her skeletal arms to her paper-thin waist, wrong waist, screamed of unnatural skinniness. She walked in long strides, her shoulders back and face held forward, wearing tall stiletto heels and a bold leopard print mini dress.
So what's the first problem with that?
Way too long.
Yeah. 139 words doesn't sound like a lot in a 100,000 word book, but seeing it in one big block like that, you just get bored halfway through. So besides being too long, the second big problem is there's not really an emotion that comes through. There's a couple of little bumps, but no, main thrust of the emotion that we're trying to go for. The description should make us feel a certain way about Angela, not just convey information. You want the description to do multiple things. So there's no emotion that kind of comes out of there.
Yeah.
So, how would we fix it? Stila. Here's one way to fix that by making it shorter and doing something else.
Agatha was all sharp lines and angles, from her pointed chin to her stiletto heels, from her bleached blonde hair to her olive oil frame. There was nothing soft about the woman. Even her movements were sharp as she sliced through the crowds in a leopard print miniskirt and bright red lipstick.
So we went from 139 words to 53, still captured the essence of Agatha, and had a little bit of emotion. You could see her slicing through the crowd. Right?
Yeah.
So that was Stila's example. I wrote the paragraph like this, and remember 2 weeks ago, you talked about style. So you may want to rewrite the paragraph as well in your own personal style. But this is how I rewrote it to keep with the original intent. This is only 72 words. Agatha had a narrow face with angular cheekbones and thinly plucked eyebrows shaped into a sharp, perfect arch. She wore tall stilettos and walked with a long, purposeful stride, but everything about her entire body structure, from her skeletal arms to her paper-thin waist, screamed of unnatural skinniness. She may have been a bleached blonde wearing a bold, leopard print mini-dress, but she was more a sickly gazelle than a lioness.
See, yours has an opinion in it, and mine has an opinion in it.
Yeah. The opinion is what the point.
Opinion,
That's the whole point, is you're trying to invoke some emotion of how do we feel about her.
Yeah, mine was the fact that there's no softness about her. That talks about not just how she looks, but also the attitude she gives off.
Yeah. So if you flip back and forth between the original and mine, what did I do first? I removed that everything that was kind of I think an overreach by the narrator. So
many adjectives.
the sharp features in Agatha's face were merely a reflection of her entire body structure. Like I'm like, the narrator can't tell me that. That's like a weird thing for the narrator to say. Bleached blonde hair made thin from too many years of hair dye, or a bright red in an unsuccessful effort to mask their unnatural thinness. I mean, these are all...
Yeah, those are, unless this is the main character and it's a third person from her POV, that's an overstretch. I wrote it as if my character were looking at her.
Yeah, the note I had was objection leading the witness. Like, that seems like the narrators are trying to... It's weird. The narrator is telling us stuff that the narrator should have no way of knowing, so I took that part out. Then I fixed this waist issue.
Oof.
And I added that stinger. This whole leopard... She may have been wearing a leopard print dress, but she was more a gazelle than a lioness. I like that because a lioness wouldn't be wearing a leopard print dress, but on the first pass, it seems like it makes sense.
Yeah.
And so and then I removed the curve of her eye thing because, again, that was something that
I don't know what they're going on with the slit-like eyes. Like, she always doing this?
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah. So both of us cut it down by half or more than half, and you still get the sense of Agatha, right?
Yeah, I barely left anything from the original in there.
And that's what we're doing. We're trying to evoke an emotion. The hazel eyes, unless we have a weird hatred of hazel eyes, you don't need to know her eyes are hazel. No. It doesn't do anything. The only time I would ever have the hazel eyes was in 5 chapters later, if you had a sentence like this. I looked into my killer's eyes. They were hazel.
Yeah.
Right, if you had that 5 chapters later, okay, then put the hazel eyes earlier on. But otherwise, you don't need it. So that is giving you a hint of what we're going to talk about in part 2, which is you're writing to invoke emotion, or you're writing to give a clue.
And notice in the examples we just gave, we took a whole bunch of... did you drop it again?
You keep going. That was the whole point, was you keep going.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Now we can't splice it. We don't have a CGI to splice it in.
We don't. So if you notice in the examples we just did, we took
Staying in.
We took a description that had a lot of details, a lot of adjectival details, way too many, and we just boiled it down to the essence of what that paragraph was trying to say about Agatha in just a couple of sentences, so that you're not overwhelmed with every little detail about her eyebrows and her chin and her cheekbones and her hair and her lipstick and her this and her butt and da-da-da-da-da. You just need broad strokes. Yeah. Interesting, colorful, broad strokes.
On the first introduction to the character, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, the shape of her jaw is not going to matter unless
I didn't even know what they were trying to exactly say with that. It was bizarre.
So, I'm glad you talked about boiling, because now we're going to do my pot boiler example. So when I was reading that original paragraph, I kept getting reminded of those like hard-boiled detective novels, you know, when the tomato came in and she had gams all the way from here to Toledo. So I rewrote this paragraph again like a pot boiler detective novel.
Gams are legs, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so here's how it would look.
I really didn't know.
Here's how it would look in a pot boiler detective novel. Agatha had a narrow face with angular cheekbones and thinly plucked eyebrows shaped into a sharp, perfect arch. She wore tall stilettos and walked with long, purposeful strides, but everything about her body, from her long legs to the pout of her red lipstick lips, screamed for my attention. She may have introduced herself as Agatha Brimble, the mayor's teenage daughter, but I knew her by another name. Trouble. Right? So again, it evokes an emotion, right? You know exactly what the main detective is thinking when he sees her. It's like, oh, this is trouble.
Yeah.
And if you look back at that paragraph, I made no description of her dress. But pretty much everyone who heard or read the description imagined her in some sort of ball gown or fancy dress or some sort of...
Or a slinky number.
Right.
Like they do.
But you let the reader do half the work in descriptions. I didn't mention her dress in here at all, but from the way the guy described it, you're like, oh, that's trouble. And that's what people are going to remember about Agatha, not her hazel eyes or sharp jaw.
Yeah.
So that's one way to write for emotion. Here's another way.
Well, this goes into Clue.
Oh.
Okay. So when I was reading it, the name Agatha kept reminding me of Agatha Hagglethorne from the third Dresden novel. And I couldn't steal that, obviously. But I clued into how unnaturally skinny she was. And if you're writing a paranormal, you might focus on that because maybe she's not human. Agatha was skeletal in her thinness, cheekbones looming over a hollow face and pointed chin. Her clothing failed to cover the absence of flesh on her arms or the slenderness of thighs smaller than her knees. She stood on stiletto heels that only exacerbated the stick figure look, but it was the eyes that gave her away. They burned with a natural yellow fire above the blood-red slash of her mouth. Agatha wasn't human. Not anymore.
Yeah, so again, you're encapsulating her. Again, you don't care really what color her dress was.
No, that didn't matter. What mattered was the essence of who and what she was.
Yeah. And if you notice at home, both those descriptions had what I call a stinger at the end, right?
Yep.
As something that summed up the one with the potboiler detective and that one. You have a long sentence, but you sum it up with a short, punchy sentence, and that's what people take away.
Right. That you give them a mental picture, a very basic mental picture, and then you tell them what the narrator or the main character is thinking about that person as they're looking at them. And that's really what you're going to end up with in the reader's mind.
Yeah, there was a book I read once called 3 Parts Dead by What's-His-Nuts, and it described this building, and it was supposed to be like this big legal building in a magical world, and he described how tall it was and the flags and the windows. But what he was really trying to say is, the building made you feel small, like an ant that's about to be stepped on by a giant foot. But he never came out and said that. He never said it. He didn't have that stinger. He described it and kind of tried to lead you there, but didn't quite get there.
So he didn't talk about it looming. He didn't talk about the character being nervous and feeling like it was about to take a step.
No, see, I put all that in afterwards, and I was like, why didn't he just include that? So what we're saying at the end of these description paragraphs, when you're doing it for the first time, err on the side of putting that in and as a stinger at the end. What should the person feel about this?
Yeah. The biggest problem the biggest realization to make is that when you're reading descriptions, you're building a mental image in your mind, and it's never going to be the exact same thing that the author is seeing in their mind. And don't try to make it that way, because it will not happen. And all you're going to do is frustrate the reader with too many details that they aren't going to assimilate anyway. So you just want to give them the feel, the mood, the important part about that character, and then keep going and let them build it on their own.
Yeah. That's a great lead-in to our next topic, which is over-description of settings. So, this will be a short one, but we've all read books where they walk into a room and it's like, here's what color the carpet was, and here's what the grandfather clock was, and here's where the mirror was, and the chandelier.
Yep.
Right? Unless you're doing a murder mystery where like someone sneaks through the grandfather clock and hangs out the chandelier to put the ice cube, knife somewhere.
To use the icicle dagger.
Yeah, the icicle dagger that they always use.
It always ends up being a puddle of water at the ant bomb.
But unless you're doing that, unless you're trying to give a clue to something, you don't need that over-level description. Whether you're describing people, mech battle suits, landscape.
Now, there are very few times when you need over-description. The only few times I could see where that would be necessary or even advisable, would be if you're trying to get across to the reader how cluttered a space is, or how overwhelmed the viewer is by the amount of things. Like if they're walking into a palace and they're being overwhelmed by the opulence, then you can take a minute to really describe the opulence, because that's what the MC is seeing.
But again, make sure, but you're doing it for a purpose, right?
Right.
Make sure you're doing it for this purpose, and not just, I really want to describe the chandelier. Like you're doing it to invoke an emotion somehow.
Which brings us to, don't describe things in loving detail unless they matter. If you're walking into a room and you only need it for that one scene, just broad strokes. You walk into the kitchen, sat at the chair on the linoleum floor. That's it. That's all you really need to know about the kitchen.
I wouldn't even describe the linoleum floor unless it made you feel at home.
Right, if you
or
wanted
made you feel
to be
cold.
homey. Right.
Yeah.
If it's a moment of downtime in the story where you're sitting down and taking a breather from something, then it can be linoleum. It can be a little comforting.
Yeah. Like I said, I wouldn't describe the linoleum floor unless the linoleum invoked an emotion in me.
Right, maybe it reminds them of their old floor, their old house, and it helps them calm down, or something like that. It has to, again, it has to carry weight.
Yeah, and so the second thing is all weight. So if you guys have ever watched The Last Starfighter, do you remember that?
I remember it, but you're going to pull out details I don't remember.
Yeah. So, the very first time the space pilot sees his ship, he's looking over the cockpit, there's a billion different buttons, but there's one that's like a red button under glass, it's like says, do not hit, and he's like, what's that button? And the reason they describe that is that pays off at the very, very end. He hits the button and he defeats, it's the overdrive, go crazy button.
Yeah.
So, that was probably something that found in the second or third draft. They got to the end and said, oh, we need this button at the end. Let's go back and describe it in the first time we see the cockpit.
Right, and that's a movie. So you can just show all the buttons and then focus on that one. When you're writing, you just say you walk in and every surface is covered with a button or a dial or a slide. It's really complicated. And then their attention is drawn to the one big red button that doesn't have a lot around it except glass.
Yeah, so actually that's a good piece of homework if you want to. What you just did there was perfect, because you just said there's a lot of buttons and that made the person feel overwhelmed, and the one thing they focused on was a clue.
Right.
Alright, so that's over description, clue. So when I write descriptions, we'll go back to Agatha. Here's a tip that's my personal style, like we talked about 2 weeks ago. You don't have to follow it, but this is my style. So if you look at the original description of Agatha, there's a lot of sentences about her body, right? There's a sentence about her face, and a sentence about her nose, and a sentence about her hair, and a sentence about her body. To keep things short, I limit it to one sentence on each topic. I get one sentence on their body, one sentence on their clothes, one sentence about how they walk, and then wrap it up with a stinger. And that's what I did in this short one. Agatha had a narrow face, she wore tall stilettos, she may have been bleached blonde wearing a bold rubber dress, but then stinger. She was more a sickly gazelle than a lioness. So I personal style, I did this in Infinity Squad 1 and 2 to keep things fast and flowing. One sentence per topic of a description.
Notice in the one that I did 3 sentences in my quick description. And I just picked out a couple of key points and I wove it into the entire description.
You're a weaver.
So, yeah, I talked about her chin, her heels, her hair, and then her overall frame in the first sentence. Then I talked about her not being soft, and then I managed to get in her leopard print miniskirt and her bright red lipstick for her outfit.
Yeah, but you're talking about the slicing and the...
Right, but she's also doing something else at the same time. So I wove the description in instead of giving you a giant block of there's this and 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 overwhelming in details. I wove it into the other things that were talked about her.
Yeah. The description paragraph had a theme, so that's your style, is to kind of weave things in.
I like to weave.
Yeah. My style, that's what makes your stuff moody, I think.
Probably.
My style is to keep it short and to have one sentence per topic. So homework this week is going to be reads. We found 2 articles that kind of talk about description. We'll link them in the description. But I hope you guys are starting to see that these tips we're giving you, we're trying to get you to write on purpose, right? Not just say, oh, I wrote this just because, or the mood took me. Everything you should do in a book should have a purpose. You're trying to get a certain effect out of every word and sentence and paragraph. So that's kind of what we're getting at with this.
And even when you're writing from a feel, you still have a purpose. The problem is your conscious mind doesn't really know what it is yet. And that's something that he taught me to do through Writers Group.
I was just going to say, do you want to talk about this example?
Because in the Writers Group, we might have talked about it already, but he would ask me things like, okay, well, what are you trying to do with this paragraph?
Yeah, I would ask you, why is the sentence there?
Because I'm telling the story. Like, I would do things by feel. You know, I would just write what felt like should be there, and I wouldn't know why precisely. I wouldn't know exactly what effect I was trying to evoke.
This is 10 years ago.
Oh yeah, it's 10 years ago.
Yeah. So we go on. Yeah.
So, at first, I was very hesitant to learn the more analytical side of it, and what I have learned is that it doesn't change how I'm doing things. It doesn't change what I tend to write, what I like to write, or my creativity. It actually makes it faster. So now my conscious mind knows what my subconscious is trying to get through and gets it done faster and more effectively. Now that I actually can describe it in words and make it more concrete.
Yeah, to me, that's the beauty of writing. If looking at Infinity Squad 1, you could send me almost any sentence from that book, and I can tell you what the purpose of that sentence was. It's either to make a joke, it's to set up an emotion, it's to give a clue. I can even tell you why the sentence is short versus long. Like, I'm doing everything for a purpose. And so that's what we're trying to get across to you guys is don't just write cool stuff, know how you're doing it so you can repeat it.
Yeah, know why you're doing it so you can get the effect you're setting out to get. I want to do X. I want people to feel this way when they read it.
That's you did talk about alpha and beta readers last time.
Yeah.
If you give your alpha and beta readers a chapter and say, I was trying to achieve this should be scary, or you should feel this way, they can give you much better feedback. Otherwise, they're just going to say, oh, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, they're allowed to say things like, I don't know, it just didn't feel right. That's fine. You figure it out from there. But And on description, right now, don't try to necessarily cut too much of your description out. I usually write everything I think might be important in my descriptions in the first and second draft. And then when I come back to the edit, once I'm done with the book, then I can go, okay, no, this detail isn't actually as important as I thought. I need to punch up this detail, and I need to move this over here. Yeah. So go ahead and put what you think now in there, but be prepared to take stuff out later.
Yeah. I say the first draft is for adding, the second draft is for taking away.
Right.
Yeah. So that's
put it in now.
Yeah, we're gonna talk to you about that later. But I was gonna say, I think we had a little good ending there, and I was gonna say something like, yeah, you can't hit a target you're not aiming at.
Yeah. That is very true.
Yeah, so know your purpose of why you're doing description. And until next week,
get writing.
Wang. Until next week,
get writing.
Wang.
That was so aggressive.
Wang?
There you go. A little softer. That Wang doesn't need to whack people over the head.